The crowd is sitting there, anticipating something amazing that to happen. During World War II, she made mature men cry in poker games and drove supply trucks with a loaded rifle. The fact that America's favorite show had to stop made her furious. You didn't think you know Betty White like this. The person behind that charming face prioritized her work over starting a family, who permanently excluded family members, and who expertly crafted her persona, to the point where even her co-stars were duped. What Betty was actually doing in those last days was just disclosed by her assistant. On January 17, 1922, Betty White was born in Oak Park, Illinois. Horace Logan White, her father, was employed by the Crouse-Hinds Electric Company, a company that was revolutionizing the lighting of American cities. The family relocated to Los Angeles when Betty was just 2 years old. This was not solely a family choice. It was a component of Crouse-Hinds' major West Coast expansion. During the 1920s power boom, Horace's executive position allowed the Whites to live comfortably during the Great Depression. Although most families were struggling, they came to California at a time when Hollywood was emerging as the global center of film. It's odd to consider that Betty, who would go on to become a television personality, grew up in a house that was lit by one of the leading lighting businesses in America. Even now, that same business, which is now a part of Eaton Corporation, contributes to city illumination. Betty didn't simply decline to let him go. She extended his airtime. Her words were, "I'm sorry. Live with it." She was strategic as well as nice. She received a local Emmy for Life with Elizabeth in the same year. It was quite important. Acting was not the only reason she was winning. She was praised for having complete control over the performance. She gained power from her victory. She used it to bargain for complete creative control over NBC's Betty White Show. Awards were not rewards to her. They were tools to her. Every trophy represented a rung on the ladder. She had an appearance on the game show, Password, in 1961. Although it appeared to be a normal guest appearance, it had a profound impact on her life. She met Alan Luton, the host, there. There was instant chemistry. "We felt like we knew each other," she later remarked. He fell in love with her quickly and proposed within weeks. But Betty repeatedly said no. She rejected him for a full year. Even when he offered her a diamond ring, it wasn't coldness, it was strategy. And she wanted to maintain control, so Luton wore the ring around his neck. She refused to move to New York and to give in. However, on Easter in 1963 something broke, and he sent her a stuffed white bunny with ruby, diamond and sapphire earrings tucked inside, along with gold leaves in its ears. She answered, "No way." They got divorced the same year they got married, and she's always loved animals. It wasn't any better in her subsequent marriage. She wed Hollywood agent Lane Allen in 1947. She departed, however, when he wanted her to give up performing and have a family. She never wanted children. She desired a job. In 1949, the year she had her first major TV break, she was divorced. There was a reason behind that time. In 1949, she began appearing on television in Hollywood, playing host Al Jarvis's helper at beginning. 5 hours a day, 6 days a week, the show was broadcast. The grind was too much for most men to manage. In 1951, Jarvis resigned, and Eddie Albert, his successor, left after only 6 months. However, Betty remained. She took over when no one else could keep up. She was soon the sole host. She didn't wait for a power invitation. She accepted it. She made the most of the demanding schedule by progressively incorporating scripted segments that would eventually serve as the foundation for her own show. Betty took another risk in 1952. In honor of her dog, she established her own business, Bandy Productions. In addition to acting, she co-produced her own sitcom alongside George Tibbles and Don Fedderson. When Life with Elizabeth debuted in 1952, she became one of the first female sitcom producers. She wrote, produced, starred, and made the decisions. Additionally, she refused to give in to pressure from Southern stations that were against the inclusion of Arthur Duncan, a black singer, when NBC picked up her next show in 1954. She gained untouchability by positioning herself as the underdog, but all that power had a cost. The Golden Girls' demise was caused by more than Arthur's departure. It was also a result of the developing conflict with Betty White, whose demands had become too great by 1992. Betty used that relationship with fans as leverage, and when season 7 ended, B had had enough. She wasn't just tired, she was frustrated. The scripts were becoming weaker, and she wanted producer credits, the last word on Rose's storylines, and more attention. She would talk to the live audience in between takes, which was considered disrespectful. But it was a calculated move. Working with Betty had become intolerable due to the constant jokes about Dorothy, and NBC could have attempted to replace her, but they decided it was no longer worth the drama. Outside of the show, Betty's personal life was equally complicated. She married Lane Allen in 1947, but their marriage didn't last. In the 1940s, women were not supposed to choose careers over children, but Betty did, and she paid the emotional price. She married Alan Luton in 1963 and became stepmother to his 3 children. He wanted children, but she didn't. That was not negotiable. She knew her future lay in television, not in raising children. They divorced in 1949. She eventually said yes to the note, which said, "Please say yes." Years later, she said that she regretted not saying yes sooner, but the wait resulted in an 18-year marriage that lasted until his death in 1981. Her friends knew that beneath that kind smile was a fiercely competitive person during their poker nights. Betty thrived in a cruel card game called Screw Thy Neighbor, in which players attempted to stick each other with bad hands. The winner kept the trophy, a brass cup engraved with Pico Poker Club, until the next game. But if they failed to bring it back, they faced a penalty of $2,000 or death, whichever was more fitting. That was Betty's rule, she said. And it was funny, but it also showed that she played to win, and that she didn't mind using intimidation, all while acting sweet. The real Betty wasn't simply playing cards, she frequently got to choose the game. And she picked her favorite version where she had the upper hand. She was playing people and winning. Even her wedding turned into a calculated move. Alan had to return to work on Password, so Betty made sure their wedding was still in the news by pulling a string that no one else could. The Tonight Show's legendary host, Jack Paar, had consistently declined to appear on Password. It wasn't just sentimental, it was smart. Ratings soared, viewers tuned in, and Betty once again demonstrated that she had the kind of pull that made things happen in Hollywood. He never said yes until Betty asked him to do so. He appeared on the show as a gift for their wedding just once, for them. She was grounded and pragmatic due to her Danish upbringing. Her Welsh ancestry supplied a rebellious streak, while her English heritage contributed a love of performance. Betty previously acknowledged that depending on the situation, she frequently felt as though she was portraying several versions of herself. Her ancestry was 31% English, 28% Danish, 23% Greek, and 18% Welsh, according to a 2010 DNA test, a combination that appeared to fit her erratic nature just right. Betty was on television before the majority of Americans had ever seen one. She made an appearance on an experimental Los Angeles TV show in 1939 when she was barely 17 years old. About 300 residences were reached. Not even a performance was expected of her. She was merely providing assistance to a friend who abruptly canceled. On board the good ship Lollipop, Betty took over and sang. Her performance was characterized as surprisingly sophisticated by one reviewer. The moment was real, but the kinescope recording was destroyed in a fire in 1971. Betty has already made her mark on television history. However, Betty's romantic life began in disarray. She wed Dick Barker, an Air Force pilot, in 1945. However, this was not a romantic tale. It was a simple physical choice. It lasted only 6 months, and she said, "We wanted to sleep together." Barker relocated Betty to his family's Ohio chicken farm after leaving the service. She detested it. For supper, she was supposed to kill chickens. Her influence didn't end there, though, as the show's salary negotiations were a battleground, with B. Arthur initially earning the highest salary due to her prior TV success. That role allowed her to change her image while avoiding a trap that had destroyed many actresses, being stuck in the same type of character forever. Betty White, however, wasn't content to simply be on the show. She wanted control. She fought for producer credits, equal pay, and even a say in the writing of her character. By the end of the show, Rue was earning over $1 million annually, or roughly $2.5 to $3 million today. Betty used her early 1986 Emmy win to gain more influence. She knew how to make money off of fame, and it worked. After the show ended, Betty became richer than anyone could have imagined, thanks to syndication. Reports indicate that she made around $3 million annually from reruns, while her co-stars made similar sums. Her estate still benefits from the terms of the contracts she negotiated during the show's run. Rose Land was the show's punching bag. Dorothy insulted her intelligence, and Blanche made fun of her lack of knowledge. But viewers loved her, and that wasn't by accident. Betty allowed her character to take the hits because she knew it made her more likable. People thought Rose was simple, but Betty was smart, strategic, and always one step ahead. She became the focal point of the show, and as Arthur grew weary of jokes about her appearance and romantic life, Betty capitalized on Rose's silly innocence, and the more audiences tried to defend her, the more power Betty gained, not only on screen but also in story meetings, where her absurd street, Olaf stories became beloved and frequently quoted. Betty became the first woman to win a Daytime Emmy for Outstanding Game Show Host in 1983, defeating Dick Clark and Richard Dawson. She did this with a show called Just Men, which ran for only 3 months, from January 3 to April Honest. But that was all Betty needed, because the format was ideal for her. 2 women had to guess the yes/no answers to 7 male celebrities. Even though the show aired during a terrible noontime slot, when most viewers were watching the news, Betty's quick wit and sharp timing made it work. She received another nomination in 1984, but even that brief show had already made history. 10 years prior, she nearly missed one of her biggest roles, when the Mary Tyler Moore Show needed a new character, for episode number 73 in 1973. Casting director Ethel Want didn't overthink it. She simply called Betty. The script described her as an icky, sweet Betty White type. The producers were anxious, because Betty was already close friends with Mary Tyler Moore and her husband Grant Tinker. What if she auditioned and wasn't right? It would be awkward. Everyone knew Betty had nailed it. Swan wasn't just another role, she was a mirror. Her first appearance was supposed to be a one-off, but after the taping, James L. Brooks pulled her aside and told her, "Don't make too many plans." That call became one of the show's most iconic characters, Sue Ann Nainvan. It wasn't just her stepdaughter Martha that died. Friendships were also broken by Betty's drive for control. She was not forgiving, she remembered. She deleted those who let her down or betrayed her. No second chances. She exuded friendliness in public. In private, however, she maintained strict limits. You were out if you argued with her. Betty White outperformed Hollywood, rather than merely surviving it. Most people assumed her appearance on Boston Legal, which ran from 2005 to 2008, was just another entertaining guest part. However, she was well aware of her actions. She was collaborating with William Shatner and James Spader on a program that received 26 Emmy nominations. Furthermore, she wasn't merely acting. She had a message for you. The former head of the Golden Girls was not going to become a footnote in a field that was preoccupied with young people. She demonstrated that she was capable of more than comedy by utilizing the legal drama's somber tone and powerful writing. It was more than a role, it was her comeback to prominence. Then, in 2009, at the age of 87, she made a shocking suggestion. As if it were nothing, she snatched sequences from Sandra Bullock and Ryan Reynolds. During rehearsal, she briefly left with a Samoyed puppy. It was not an impromptu joke, despite its appearance. She was never accepted by one of them, Martha, and they didn't talk for 30 years. Despite Martha's attempts to patch things up, Betty closed the door. According to friends, Betty felt that Martha made Alan's last years more difficult, and she'd never forgiven her. Then, in 1981, Alan Luton passed away 3 days before their 18th anniversary. He had stomach cancer, and Betty had supported him through public appearances, hospital stays, and rehearsals. She declared she would never be married again after his passing, saying, "Once you've got the best, why needs the rest?" His death also released me from compromise, she told reporters. But there was more to the tears. Her work and her animals took up all of her time, attention, and energy after that. She showered her affection there. Sally Struts revealed a revelation she had been keeping to herself for years in 2025. She claimed that Betty had asked her to her house for a game show meeting. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, dear." "You don't need a cookie," Betty replied with a charming smile, as Stirs reached for a cookie. It was slicing. It was open to the public. It wasn't a joke either. She was described as extremely passive-aggressive by Sally. It was consistent with previous behind-the-scenes stories. Charm was one of Betty's tools of control. She cloaked her power with civility. Don't get me wrong, though, she was always in control. She also cut individuals off when they didn't follow the line. In a 1976 sketch, she played Eunice's snobby sister, Ellen, who was sardonic, cold, and hilarious. In another, she played an elderly woman at a college reunion, demonstrating her versatility across age groups. She used them to maintain her fame during that uncertain period between major roles. Betty White and Rue Lanahan were supposed to play opposite roles, and everyone thought the director had changed her mind at the last minute. However, producers wanted Betty as Blanche and Rue as Rose, and it made perfect sense. These roles weren't just for laughs, they were career chess moves, each one keeping her relevant, each one bringing her closer to the Golden Girls. Rue was known as Ma's sweet, scatter-brained friend, and Betty had already portrayed the man-hungry Sue Ann Nen. However, behind the scenes, Betty wasn't happy because she'd been playing seductive roles for years and wanted something different. So she lobbied quietly but successfully. It wasn't random, it was strategic, and it changed television forever. Betty became Rose, naive, innocent, and lovable, and audiences loved her. Rue later said she was thrilled when the director asked her to switch roles during her audition, but she didn't realize that Betty had already made it happen. Betty was already in command by the time she got to high school. She did more than merely perform in the senior graduation performance at Beverly Hills High in 1939. She revised it. Like a general delivering orders, she starred in it, directed it, and assigned roles. Her classmates referred to her as Little Napoleon in jest. The audience was taken aback by the play, which was a scathing comedy that made fun of Hollywood. There were some real Hollywood celebrities present, and they witnessed their own roasting on stage. Betty's performance was described as unnervingly mature by the local newspaper. Even at the age of 17, she had the confidence to use comedy to criticize influential people. When World War II broke out just 2 years later, Betty didn't take it easy. She drove supply trucks into difficult areas of Hollywood and Santa Monica after joining the American Women's Voluntary Services. At night, she was 19 and alone with smokes, chocolates, and even a loaded .38 handgun. She served more than 15,000 miles and didn't hesitate to confront inebriated or hostile soldiers. She forcibly removed a man from a younger volunteer in one instance. This harsh, gritty aspect of Betty was always present, even though her charming image emerged years later. She had mastered the art of remaining composed and confident in the face of peril. Her history played a role in shaping that confidence. Christine, her mother, was of mixed Welsh, Danish, English, and Greek ancestry. In 1898, Christine's Greek family fled poverty in Thessaloniki and relocated to a Greek hamlet in Chicago. Betty's Greek heritage gave her a keen sense of humor and drama. Sue Ann was the ideal housewife on screen, hosting shows like Salutation to Fruit and What's All This Fuss About Famine. But behind it all, she was frigid, cynical, and preoccupied with men. Betty once said, "You can't get much more rotten than the neighborhood nymphomaniac." Sue Ann wasn't just funny, she was brilliant commentary wrapped in charm. Betty's role didn't just entertain, it won her 2 consecutive Emmys for Outstanding Supporting Actress in 1975 and 1976. She leaned into the role and played it with layers. The audience squirmed as well as laughed, and that's what made it work. The timing couldn't have been better. Betty made sure Sue Ann could carry stories on her own. And even in the final season, when she had less screen time, she still received nominations, demonstrating how deeply she had ingrained herself in the success of the show. She joined the main cast in the 5th season after Valerie Harper left, and it wasn't just talent. She played the long game both on and off screen. After the Mary Tyler Moore Show ended in 1977, Betty didn't vanish. She showed up where it mattered. Her appearances on The Carol Burnett Show weren't arbitrary. It was also politics. She developed close relationships with writers and producers, and was careful never to overshadow Mary Tyler Moore. She later claimed not to have given it any thought. She simply did something. She was not stopped. One of the most talked about scenes in the film was that move, which made it into the final edit. It wasn't a stroke of luck. Decades of performing had honed the instinct. She made Hollywood acknowledge that she was a relic from the past. It was still with Betty. And she turned the tables once more just when people believed they understood her. 2010 saw the success of a Facebook campaign. SNL will be hosted by Betty White. Hundreds of thousands joined in a matter of weeks. NBC gave in. Behind the scenes, however, it didn't seem that arbitrary. It was too ideal. She had made an appearance in a Snickers commercial during the Super Bowl a few weeks prior. It went viral. The return of SNL icons, Tina Fey and Maya Rudolph, the campaign, and her hosting date of May 8th, all looked a little too planned. Although she was aware of what had just transpired, she joked that she would beat up the person who began the petition. She was more adept at using the internet than persons half her age. The outcome was an Emmy, a viral moment, and an increase in ratings. It's not a resurgence. That's a tactic. she had not finished yet. 2010 saw the premiere of Hot in Cleveland. The 88-year-old Betty White wasn't merely a showman. She received credit as an executive producer. The program became as TV Land's biggest hit ever. 6 seasons, 128 episodes. Hila was more than just a comedy relief character. The star of the show was her. She was adored by critics. She received SAG honors. Behind the scenes, her producer credit represented control, money, authority, and creative choices. She had watched males take credit for decades. She was on her own now. She doubled down at a time when most actors start to fade out. However, behind the scenes, things weren't quite as ideal as they appeared. Betty continued to tell the media that she felt great and was in excellent health until a few days before she passed away on December 31, 2021. The reality was different. During the epidemic, she struggled with memory and movement, and she hardly left home, not simply out of caution, but also because her body was weakening. Kristen Nicholas, her longtime assistant, kept the image alive. Every public image and statement was meticulously curated. Betty continued to shine for the globe. On the inside, she was fading. The world was horrified by her last remarks. Alan. The notion that she was screaming out to her late husband, Alan Luton, made people swoon. Her loved ones, however, were aware that the truth might be more burdensome. In 1963, Betty and Luton were married. In 1981, he passed away from cancer. She never got married again. When you've had the best, who needs the rest? She once remarked. But she had also been gone from him for years, pursuing a career and choosing it over time together, suggesting that his name might not have been romantic. Perhaps it was regret. The stroke followed. A big stroke struck Betty on Christmas Day, 2021. It was never disclosed 6 days before to her death. Her group remained silent. 5 days prior, she had recorded her final video message for her admirers, promoting her 100th birthday celebration while smiling and suited up. The stroke was stated as the cause of death on her death certificate. Then she had remained conscious and attentive, but she could not be saved. Until the very end, her team kept the image safe. Fans were divided by what transpired next. There was previously a documentary called Betty White, 100 Years Young. It included her parting message. The crew had a decision to make after her passing: release it or cancel it. They decided to proceed. The movie was shown in 1/500 theaters on January 17, 2022, which would have been her 100th birthday. It was a huge financial success. It was said to honor her. Some referred to it as a cash grab. The cameras were still rolling nonetheless. Additionally, Betty's farewell was converted into a box office success. In the middle of all of this was Kirsten Miklas, her assistant. When Betty passed away, she was present. She controlled her daily activities, her publicity, her social media, and her legacy. She posted one of Betty's final pictures, taken on December 20, 2021. She passed away just 11 days prior. Betty was glowing that day, she said. Miklas took up the role of guardian of Betty's reputation after her passing. She now has complete control over Betty's internet persona and the secrets that no one else is aware of. However, Betty knows how to choose individuals and maintain power even after death, so she has never told them. Neither Sua Nunvin nor Rose Land was Betty White's best role. It was the legendary Betty White. When she made her television debut in 1949, she began to develop that persona on her own. Even though she was the sharpest person in the room, she understood how to play the nice grandma, smile, and deflect. She was always one step ahead, competitive without being obvious, and brutal when necessary. The audience still viewed her as innocent Betty, even when she played dirty parts. It wasn't pure chance. She gained authority from that image, which was the pinnacle of image manipulation. She was feared by other celebrities not because she was cruel, but rather because she was well-informed. She never had to use it, and had dirt on everyone. In the 1950s, she had been among the first female TV producers to run their own business. She developed connections with agents, executives, and celebrities of all ages. Betty White's support helped you advance in your job. People took note when she remained silent. With simply a jest or a smile, she could launch or break a trend.